and I'll be presenting on measuring arts project outcomes, provisional framework for elderly people with dementia. The scope of my presentation is as follows. I'll give a brief background to the context of the project, first from the library theatre's perspective, then from dementia studies, and then I'll take a look at some of the arguments within applied theatre, and then I'll give a framework context. The library theatre has been working with the elderly since 2006, and in 2010 they developed a storybox project, which I'll explain in a bit. And they've just been given a sum of money to develop a 3-year project to document and evidence outcomes. And because they've been awarded this sum of money and they need to measure outcomes, they have approached our university. So the Dementia and Aging Research team called DART is on the team now, headed by Professor John Keedy. In April, I think Jenny sent out an email to the drama department and asked volunteer researchers to be on it, and I volunteered. So the Storybox project. At this juncture, I'd like to acknowledge the library theatre for some of the information as well as the pictures that they provided. So the Storybox project really is about creating fun experiences for the elderly with dementia, using props, music, and costumes to support storytelling. Through the drama games, they are hoping to promote a sense of togetherness, to lift moods, and to improve concentration. They also encourage carers to be involved for the sustainability of the project. From the funding, they're hoping to achieve these outcomes. 30 workshop programs, 300 participants, 80% of older people showing improved well-being, 70% increase in the number of carers believing in the work, and a general increase in arts activities at the center. Now here are some photographs at the session, so I'm just going to go through it very quickly. In their methodology, the library theatre would like to take a look at these groups of people, participant, carer, family, and artists, and through interviews, questionnaires, as well as video documentation at the center and at home, they hope to document or evidence well-being. And of the 4 concerns they have with regards to evaluation, I'd like to highlight 2 of them. How do we capture quality? How do we measure artistic development, attitudes of care staff, and impact on well-being of participants? My follow-up question would be, can the photographs be adequate visual evidence of their impact? Or do we need a more systematic method to capture the quality of the interactions during each storytelling session? I'm going to pause for a while and then move on to one study in dementia in which Professor John Keedy was involved. In this report, they state that the current literature has focused a lot on pharmacological interventions in reminiscence groups for people with dementia. And while there is growing recognition that psychosocial interventions are useful, there is really little evidence in terms of its effectiveness in these programs. And in their methodology, there is an intervention group and a control group. Over 12 consecutive weeks, 200 pairs of individuals were interviewed. Among other outcomes, such as memories and levels of depression and anxiety, the primary outcome of this study tried to measure is quality of life in Alzheimer's disease, QOLAD. So for your information, the QOLAD is a structured interview questionnaire interview covering 13 domains such as physical health, energy, mood, living situation, memory, family, marriage, friends, self, ability to do things, ability to do fun things, money, and life as a whole. So the respondents have to circle these interview questions. And according to Professor Keedy, this study, which used these standardized benchmarks, could not capture those poignant moments in their sessions. He gave an example where they brought a baby into the room, and suddenly the people got up and wanted to reach and carry the baby. And those emotional connections, associated memories, as well as feelings of joy, could not be measured using these standardized instruments. Next, let's take a look at the issues around measurement in applied theatre. In an article by Etherton and Prentke in the Research in Drama Education Journal, they identified that universities, including ours, have avoided the issue of impact assessment. For practitioners whose livelihood is in the field, we are also unlikely to take a look at that because it kills the goose that lays the golden eggs. Arts workers, on the other hand, are suspicious of measurements from social sciences and are reluctant to develop their own. And at the same time, arts practitioners are wary of NGOs doing that same thing. I'm going to read a little bit of a longer quote. With applied theatre as a message delivery service, it is far easier to evaluate the outcome. The message is either understood or not. I'm going to skip a bit. Where there is no message or issue at the heart of the process, but rather the encouragement to the community to develop self-confidence and assume control over their lives, it is much more difficult to assess whether such a personal transformation has led in the long run to the wider social impact envisaged. And to me, this need to measure wider social impact is really outside the drama event, something I think arts practitioners are not equipped to handle. And when we talk about long-term effects, impact, and social change, we are really looking at this cause and effect relationship, i.e., how can drama create social change in the long run? I like to argue that this directionality of this cause-effect relationship is misplaced. Instead, we should be asking how the community's needs are changing our artistic practice. And as we go about delivering and working with the target group, how susceptible are we to these social changes from the institution to meeting the group dynamics and other factors that are in the moment as we facilitate these drama workshops? So we are moving from a unilateral concept of cause-effect to one that is omnidirectional. And I think we are not just creating stories for fun, but the session itself has to be purposeful for measurements to take place, where drama facilitation is also in the moment of creation. Well, this leads on to two theoretical bases of the framework that I'm proposing. Firstly, Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy from the education sector states that teachers need to know what they're teaching, how students learn, and how we can engage with students. And more specifically, in terms of thinking skills, a lesson starts off with lower levels of thinking, such as remembering, understanding, and applying. As we move up the scale in analyzing, evaluating, and creating, we're using higher order thinking skills. So a unit plan in school should move up these levels of cognitive engagement. Next, my proposed framework is based on Laban's movement analysis. He analyzed movements into time, space, force, and relationships, and created a language that allowed us to annotate dancers' movements that can be repeated. I designed a performance rubric based on 4 domains: the cognitive, the behavioral, emotional, the creative, aesthetic, and the kinesthetic. On this template, you have to fill out information such as these: name of participant, date, time, venue, contextual information prior to the session, recorded by whom. On the left side of the column, we have the domains and the various descriptors at different levels, some of which may be of increasing complexity, but some are not. Across the row, there is a scale from non-observed, absent, occasional to sustained. A participant's baseline is observed and identified so that significant changes below and above his baseline or her baseline will represent the visible changes. Let's take a look at the first one, the cognitive domain. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because according to people in the dementia care and social workers, they said that they're moving away from the dementia cognitive model of treatment to person-centered and relationship-centered model of dementia care. But this is very much based on Bloom's taxonomy. So as an example, within the story frame, how would we could assess the participant's ability to remember a character's name, predict the obstacles she might face in the story, how to get around these obstacles, and evaluate the solutions she had proposed to bring the story to an end. The next domain is the behavioral emotional domain. It ranges from levels of engagement, really, from mere participation through active cooperation and eventually allowing participants to articulate their feelings and emotions, hopefully leading on to showing empathy towards others, even if it's in a narrative frame. The third domain is the creative, creative aesthetic domain. The first descriptor is based on Jacob Moreno's term role repertoire, as well as Robert Landy's role theory. In this, I define it as the ability to invoke a role, take it on, and play the role. Spontaneity is the ability to accept, reject, and modify offers. So if in the story they said, someone says it's raining, and if they were to accept the offers, they would say, yeah, let's stay indoors and play games, indoor games. But if they were to reject the offer, they say, no, it's not raining, the sun is still shining brightly. So again, but there's no value judgment in accepting and rejecting offers. Part of the role repertoire is the ability to come in and out of roles, which I have defined as situational flexibility as a character in the story, as a secondary character, a minor character, or as a narrator looking in and out. Next, imagination involves literal and symbolic representation. So in reminiscence groups, they often ask, what's the most significant moment in your life, and if you can act it out. And if they were to act out their marriage vows, for example, then that would be a literal representation. But if they were to use objects and puppets to tell the story, then that would be symbolic. Next, these elements of drama are taken from Brad Haseman and John O'Toole. This was based on classroom drama and what makes drama acquire dramatic meanings. For example, through the clear identification of context and setting, characters develop dramatic tension through surprise and suspense, for example, and with language and movement, we create mood and symbols which enhance dramatic meanings. Lastly, for this domain, I'm going to focus on the learning of an art form. So for example, photography, collage, painting, mask making could be the different forms of engagement, and how the participants create, perform, and reflect on these forms may be assessed. Finally, to illustrate the use of the kinesthetic model, I'm going to show a clip of a person with Alzheimer's, a kind of progressive dementia. And to have a very brief idea of Laban's vocabulary, I'm going to ask you to just take a look at this before I show the video.
When people are very old and deteriorated and no one enters their world and they're just sitting there, they will withdraw inward more and more. And their desperate need for connection is all now inside. And if a person is all alone, even if they're very, very deteriorated, there's a longing for this kind of closeness. Mrs. Wilson?
I'm going to pause it for a minute. At the start of the video, you see Mrs. Wilson extending her arms in far reach, grabbing Naomi by the side of her arms as a way of greeting. Later, she will place her hands on Naomi's shoulders, requesting her to sit. And in terms of levels, she is moving from middle to low in directions up to down, exerting a smooth, sustained energy and a strong weighted force, almost pushing her to a chair. So throughout the video, her flow or control is bound in the bounce terminology.
Hello? You want me to sit? Do you see me good?
Directions up and down and left and right
Gladys
later.
Wilson is a wonderful example of a person who is in the phase of repetitive motion, where people use movements, repetitive movements, because they don't have any more speech, or very little speech. But they have human needs that need to be expressed.
In terms of pathways, straight and curved as well.
Crying and a tear right here in your face. You have a little pain. You want me to touch you. You're very sad. Can you see me? Is it scary? Are you afraid? And if this person sits with their eyes closed, rocking back and forth, and maybe there's a tear coming down, there's a need there. There's a little tear that's coming up.
I'm going to pause for a while. She's going to ask, can you let me in a little bit? If Mrs. Wilson sat up, I mean, at this point, later you will see her sitting up. And if sitting down on the chair is her baseline, which is low, her little movement could be described as middle to high. So that is, again, a kinesthetic response.
Feel it? You feel a little tear? If you gently use touch, and I touched Gladys Wilson for the fingertips right here on the cheek, is where the mother usually touches a child. If you touch an infant there, it looks up. And every cell remembers where it was touched by the mother. And often that person knows, even if they can't say a word at that moment, they won't talk, or they don't want to talk. But there's a communication. And that person is no longer alone. Can you let me in a little bit?
Observe the movement.
Just a little. This I know, for the Bible tells
It's in sync with the rhythm and tempo.
Music. Because when speech is gone, music, especially with Gladys Wilson, it was religious music because there's emotion tied to it and safety tied to it. So I used her old church song. Jesus.
She picks up speed and she slows down later.
Yes, Jesus.
And her tapping becomes accented on every syllable of the song.
Jesus loves me, the Bible tells me so. What I did was, when she moved, I moved with her. And when I was singing, because she didn't sing with me, so I matched the intensity of my voice to the intensity of her movement. And pretty soon, for a split second, we became one person. Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me.
Change in direction.
The Bible tells me so. So at one point, when she got very quiet and very peaceful, and my voice became very quiet as hers and very peaceful, and my breathing slowed to her breathing.
I'm going to pause for a while. She's going to pull Naomi towards her, forehead to forehead, and that in Laban's terminology here is to pull from general space to personal space, moving from mid-reach to near-reach, and I think energy here is both sharp and sustained. Her weight is strong, look at the tugging that you'll see, and then her flow is very bound and very much in control.
She pulled me to her, and I moved with her. And for her, at that moment, I believe I was a symbol of her mom. Open your eyes now.
Multi-focus response to auditory, kinesthetic, and visual inputs. Her chewing action now, it's a sudden movement in chewing, from the hands to the tears, and now you see it in the mouth. So later you will see that she will start singing, and that I think is a real shift in terms of the kinesthetic observations.
In his hands, he's got the whole world. In his hands, he's got the whole world. In his hands, he's got the whole world. He's got the mothers and the fathers. He's got the mothers and the fathers. He's got the mothers and the fathers. He's got the whole world in his head. The breakthrough doesn't happen every time.
You can see that it's true, the breakthrough doesn't happen every time, but if you were to use language to talk about what's happening, I think you can also talk about her tune and pitch and tempo, all in accurate timing. Even that brief moment, which cannot be captured sometimes in other instruments. So in terms of the relationship to her body, you notice that it's very much on the right side of her body. Relationship to music, she's responding very clearly, as well as to other audio-visual input, and emotionally to her therapist. All right. So if the baseline of measurement is non-existent, if Mrs. Wilson was not actively engaged, then these descriptors already show a range of movements that can be captured in performance language. So I think that's a capture of these in-the-moment moments. How do we use this rubric? We can focus on one domain each week, or we can focus on sub-elements within each week. But over a 10-week period, if there were changes observed from the baseline, then those are the changes that we want to document, as well as it becomes a way to identify which are the weaker elements that we want to concentrate on in the next treatment phase. So here's a recap. The library theatre is interested in capturing quality of well-being of participants. The DART team has indicated an inability of their standardized instruments to manage the processes. And within applied theatre, I've argued that we should not be looking at impact measurement outside the drama event, but at how the needs are changing our artistic practice. And from there, I developed a rubric that focused on 4 domains: So here's a summary. It is both a diagnostic and a treatment tool. Each drama session is purposefully created with an end in mind towards a lesson objective. It provides social workers and arts practitioners a language to describe immediate tangible outcomes, and it is a method, I think, to capture in the moments. And with that, thank you.
Can I open up for questions, please?
They were happy with it, but they didn't want to talk a lot about it because they are moving away from cognitive. And when I started giving them the aesthetic as well as the kinesthetic, they got a little more excited because they didn't have the language to talk about the work. So I think at this moment we're going to sort of feed in dementia literature into that rubric to see how we can develop this into a pilot project. Yeah.
I wonder how you found, what it feels like from your presentation is that you're trying to create a kind of hybrid language that talks to two disciplines and also as a practitioner and theorist. So, you know, when you're watching the old ladies, you know, one can critique the framework of it, but actually what you're doing is breaking it down, and using Marvin is a really great idea. I've never thought of doing that. How have you found, as a researcher, that need to develop that sort of hybrid language? Do you feel as if you're working between two things, or?
It's an interesting question. I just feel that there is a need for me to use my work or the language that I have in my practice to enhance someone else's practice somehow. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't find that it was very challenging. I think maybe because I think in my honors thesis years, I sort of looked at sign language.
Right.
I didn't realize that because I forgot about that. So I think when I was analyzing the video, oh, we find it in sign language. So I thought, okay, I sort of have that background as well. So it became quite natural in a way to just maybe infuse the bun and then, okay, open up the discussion to see what else we can do. Again, the domains are just four, but maybe we can include a lot more domains along the way to see how else we can capture these in the moments.
And that idea of the in-moment moment, I love it, and I think that's as relevant to a theatre historian as it is to somebody working at applied theatre. Have you found the language of dementia studies has informed your practice? Not just your kind of analysis, but the actual practice that you...
I haven't read enough of dementia literature, so I don't know yet.
Sort of working with their world. And
at the moment I'm just contributing, so their language is very much on the standardized instruments that I find difficult. I mean, I initially had some data, statistical data, which I couldn't understand, 0.28 QOL80. And then I asked Professor John Key, could he explain that? And he says, no, I'm not going to explain that, so I'll give you this video, you know, see what you think of it. Yeah, so that was interesting in terms of engaging with a different set of measurements, and at the same time coming up with something that I think we can sort of think about.